Captain Thomas brought the aircraft back one day. It had the god awfulest sound I ever heard. Couldn't figure out why, other than the fact that he'd been in flat country pretty heavy. The upshot of the whole thing was when they hit the ground, there was a whine that, well, it sounded like a jet engine today. Come to find out, there was a hole about as big around as my finger in one of the blades on number 4 engine. And the prop had been feathered up. He was lucky enough to get it feathered up. And according to his story, along with the hole in the windshield, and that windshield, ladies and gentlemen, was about 4 to 6 inches thick. That was the center of the windshield. It was supposedly armor plate, but there was a hole in that windshield. But the dome on number 4 engine was smashed all to pieces along with a couple of cylinders. We started changing engines immediately. Got her into the revetment, got the crew chief stands up there, and I was up on that crew chief stand with my left-handed wrenches. Somebody found out that I was right-handed. So my left-handed wrenches went to Morosi, and I got Morosi's right-handed wrenches. Made the job a little bit easier. But us young whippersnappers were about 17 years old, maybe 18. I don't know, you have to ask the chief over here just how old we were, because he was slapping us around pretty good. It took us originally about 14 to 16 hours to change an engine. And we didn't care what kind of weather, if it was weather at all, or if we had snow up to you know where. But we did it. And he realized how much of a problem we were having. As a result, the engine mounts were put on the back of the engine. The mags and the prop governor, all of the rest of the equipment was transferred over, and here come an engine on a cart. All we had to do was pull the engine off of the wing with the mounts and everything attached to it, and shove it out of the way, get the other one over there and hoist it up, put it in, put the bolts in, hook up the hydraulic lines, power the fuel lines, oil lines, and get her going. Sometimes we'd see the flight crew going to chow in the morning at 4 o'clock for an 8 o'clock mission. And we were hustling, trying to get that engine to turn over and get her fired up to where we could find out whether it was going to run or not. We also had to take care of all of the flak damage, bullet holes, chunks of flak that went through the fuselage. If we weren't leaking fuel out of the wings, we'd go ahead and refuel. As a result, I got a hold of Captain Thomas when they debarked from the mission before the night before, and asked him what his problems was. Well, number 3 engine wouldn't hold hydraulic fluid. Come to find out, a hydraulic line in Bombay had been cut, so we had to repair that. Also the flight log entries. Everybody that had any problem with a gun, a feeder line, fuel transfer switch, anything, was indicated in that log. As a result, the 3 of us, including Joseph Guard, my crew chief, worked around the clock. I'd find Joe up in the cockpit every once in a while, trying to figure out whether his right hand was working with his left hand or whether he was just trying to stay awake. But it didn't make any difference. We got that bird going. But we did it our way. And oftentimes, I hid behind the main landing gear so that the headlights from, what's his name? Wouldn't find me, because I was just about that wide, all of 110 pounds. So we did it our way. Sheet metal people came out, prop people came out. We hung the prop, slow timed the engine if there was time, because here come the weapons carrier down the ramp, down the taxi strip, with our new flight crew. New flight crew? Jack Thomas was on that cotton picking flight crew going back upstairs.
Oh, Sedge, I have a question. When you took an engine off and replaced it with one ready to go, did you get involved in rebuilding the engine you took off, or how did that work?
There wasn't much of anything that I didn't get involved with.
Okay.
Because my job, well, I've been through school, and my job was to make sure that that engine was going to run.
Yeah.
What the flight chief, Henderson, and Owen Pickett didn't know was that I acquired a rotary, or a rat tail file. And oftentimes I had that rat tail file on my uniform. And if the engine didn't sound right, I'd pull a mag, it'd work on the little hole where the bolt came through, where it fastened to the back side of the engine, and just move that mag just a little bit, the same way with the other mag, so that both mags working on that 1830, that 65 engine, Pratt & Whitney, double roll engine, should sound like a sewing machine. And as a result, I had several pilots try to figure out how to throttle back in the air to stay with the rest of the formation. So that was just one of the things that I never did make mention of to a certain individual. You had a question?
Yeah, you said when you remounted the engine, you had to slow time it. What does that mean?
Slow time it. We wanted to make sure that the engine that we hung, that came out of the shop after rebuilding, would work. Because oftentimes, even when we were at Fairmont, where we did our pre-training before we went overseas, we had some sick engines. We'd get filings in the oil system, and it'll last for about 30 to maybe an hour and a half. And some of you may not know, but I've got half of a crew underground up at Wayne, Nebraska, because we had 4 sick engines on that aircraft. We'd get the aircraft ready to go, slow time the engine in Costa Lucha. If there was time, Joe Guard would call for a flight crew, and oftentimes, even though I wasn't supposed to be flying, I'd get some aircraft time in the air. As we take her up and take her around the field, bring her back, set her down, taxi in, refuel, and top off the oil tank. Get her ready to go. Like I said, here comes a weapons carrier down the taxi strip with our crew. And the first thing that happened, my red hair caused all kinds of problems, and sometimes they'd try to indicate that my red hair was the exhaust on one of the engines, and a few other things that they'd come up with. Us whippersnappers were still moving around that airplane pretty quick. We'd load them up, do the walk around first, load them up, get them in their positions, and fire up. And I still had to hang on to that red fire extinguisher behind each engine, so that if she did backfire, the backfire would go out instead of up. But we had a pretty good crew, and Joe Gard and the rest of us guys would get together, but we'd see a Jeep coming down the road. He'd stop out on the taxi strip before he come into the revetment and make sure everything was kosher. We'd all hide out. But if you've got any further questions, that's about the size of my story.
How many weeks of training did you get?
Excuse me?
How many weeks of training did you get before you went overseas?
Well, I went to work for Northwest Airlines at 16, and they put me through a engine rebuilding program plus sheet metal program, and at Holman Field in St. Paul, Minnesota. And from there I went into the National Youth Administration program, graduated from there after I rebuilt a bulbous glider. As a result, when I came out of Canada and went to Dyersburg, Tennessee, I was down there about 2 days, and they sent me to Salt Lake City for reevaluation and hung a couple of stripes on my arm and said, okay, you're a corporal. Corporal? What's corporal? Well, you get $2 more in pay. So that was my education before I got on the flight line. Yeah.
I'd like to have you either confirm, deny, or no comment on.
No comment.
I knew you were going to say that. On the rumor that sometimes when there wasn't enough time between missions, that instead of calling sheet metal out to patch the black holes, they were just, shall we say, covered over with some tape and slapped some paint on it.
Oh, yeah, you did want to bring that out, didn't you? That is a true story. On more than one occasion, on Hopscotch and Wheezy, Bodacious Critter, Sidebuster, and several other airplanes, a bucket of gold and a paintbrush with a little bit of fabric did wonders to keep those aircraft from screaming like a Comanche Indian. Pardon my French. But yeah, we did. And it wasn't unusual when they came back from a mission to count at least 200 holes in any and all parts of that aircraft. And the only thing that we really got concerned about, because we could handle, as you say, holes in the fuselage, tail assembly, and the wings, was whether we were leaking fuel. And back then, we changed fuel pumps like they were going out of style. But the other side of the coin was that the hydraulic pump being on number 3 engine, if anything happened to that engine, we couldn't get the gear down unless we dropped it manually by pulling on the cord up in the cockpit. And there was several articles that way that, well, the reservoir was at times holding pressure that wasn't supposed to be there. But you get that hydraulic reservoir filled up and stick your finger in the hole to make sure that the filter was working properly so that it would release pressure as the airplane came back down and hold pressure as it went up. But we did our job, but we did it as a family, and we did it our way. And that, ladies and gentlemen, now you know the rest of the story.
Thank you very much, Sedge. Our next speaker is a nose turret veteran gunner, 35 missions, written a book about his experiences, and has done wonderful things related to the air war in Europe. We had a nose gunner, his name was Little Jones, and he had a habit as we approached the target, and he kind of stuttered when he said it. He always said flak, 12 o'clock. I went to him one day and I said, Jack, you're making the crew real nervous when you say this. You could just say 2 o'clock low or something high, but you don't need to say 12 o'clock, meaning that we were heading right into it. And I never had much luck changing his. But anyway, Kozakis has made a senior specialty of talking to high school students. He's made many talks. He told me today that in one day he made 3 talks at different high schools. And he's done a real job in acquainting the young people in the Texas area where he lives about the air war. And he also was, as I say, a veteran member of a crew. He received the Purple Heart, and I guess I can't say enough about him. He's been a supporter of our bomb group for many years, and also he's one of the few people that still can wear his uniform. So Aki, take over.
Thank you. Win, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk to you guys about the way it was. We were a replacement crew, and Harold L. Patterson was our pilot and our commander. And I'm going to tell you the way it was when I arrived at the 451st Bomb Group in October '44. And usually, we got there one night. It was late at night when we arrived, and of course, the Army didn't have any billet for us, snafu, you know, and so we found any place we could sleep. So I got into a tent where there was a bunch of oil drums. I rolled out my sleeping bag, and that's where I slept that night. So in the morning, we all got together, and Henry B. Ford was the operations officer. So he gave us a welcome speech. And after the speech, he told the enlisted men, you report to the supply sergeant tent. So the 6 of us take off for the supply sergeant tent. And the supply sergeant issues us a tent. He says, now you guys can set this tent up any way you want in the squadron, as long as it's in the enlisted men's area. At that time, you know, it still is, I guess, segregation between the officers and the enlisted men. So we set up our tent, and then he issued us each a cot. He issued us each a mattress cover. And he issued us each 2 blankets. And he also issued us a steel helmet. No liner, just a steel helmet. So we got all this gear together, we set up our tent, no problem. And in a cot, there's no way Kozakis is going to sleep in a cot without an air mattress for the duration. No way I could sleep in a cot. So we didn't get any air mattresses. It looked like the ground crews had all the air mattresses. There weren't any available. So the mattress cover, what is the mattress cover for? We don't have a mattress. Well, we found out the mattress cover is our sheets. We slip in that mattress cover, and we sleep in the mattress cover. Those were our sheets. And of course, the blankets kept us warm. And the helmet, well, the helmet became our wash basin. There we washed, facing the hands, and also took our sponge baths. There were no showers. However, one time I saw 2 trucks come into the squadron. One truck had a water tank and a boiler on it, and the other one had it set up for guys to take a shower. And they would come in maybe once a month or once every 2 or 3 months. And that's the only shower I ever took in the squadron, one time. Now, there was no way, of course, I was going to sleep in that cot. So we had to find somebody to build us we needed a door for our tent. We didn't have no door, and every time the wind blew, the air would just come in. So we needed a door for a tent. We needed a stove to keep warm in the winter and heat our water. And Kozakis needed a bunk. There's no way I'm going to sleep in that cot. So for the first 2 or 3 days, we're looking around the squadron, who has what, so forth, what we could requisition, you know. And this question always came up about who could get what. And the name that kept up most of the time was Thirsty. This name, Thirsty. I said, God, that guy must drink a lot, you know. And being smart with the way I was, before I came overseas, I bought 4/5 of whiskey. So I took 1/5 of whiskey out of my B4 bag, put it in my field jacket, and they told me, Kozakis, that guy Thirsty is out of the 60th Service Squadron. So I trudged over to the 60th Service Squadron. It was just about maybe a quarter mile away, and I'm looking for Thirsty. And I see this casa, this house is built out of tuba block. It's like our concrete masonry today, only larger. You can cut it with a saw. This thing was about 20 feet long and about 20 feet wide, and it had a metal roof, galvanized roof on it. And it had a big front door, and also a step leading up to the door. I said, maybe these guys are living in high cotton, because outside there were 2 droppable tanks on airframes, and the hoses were going into the house. So these guys got showers, I guess, you know, they're living in high cotton. So anyway, I knocked on this door, and no answer. Then I knock again real hard. All of a sudden, an old sergeant will come out, and he looks at me. Here's a peach fuzz-faced corporal, you know, and I'm saying, does Thirsty live here? He says, yeah, he's here. I says, can I talk to him? And he looks at me again and says, yeah, come on in. He's laying in his bunk over there. So I walk in, and wooden floors, you know, table, chairs. These guys are living it up. And each guy, there was 4 bunks. Each guy had bunk, spring, mattresses, sheets, pillows, the whole 9 yards. So I walk up to this bunk where Thirsty was, and I'm at the foot of the bunk. And he's laying in his bunk like this, and his fatigue hat over his eyes. And I said, you thirsty? He says, yeah, what the hell you want? Just like that. He ain't looking at me, you know, but he's still laying there. I said, look, I tell him what I need. I need a door for our tent, a stove to keep warm, and I need a bunk. He says, what makes you think I can get all those things? So I pull out that 5th of whiskey, and I hand like that. Right away, he gets out of that bunk and lunges for the whiskey. I said, wait a minute. I step back. I said, this is yours when you can deliver the goods. Can you do it in 4 or 5 days? Okay, Greek. He couldn't pronounce my name, he called me Greek. Okay, Greek, I promise, I'll do it. So he drove me back to my tent in his Jeep. And there I told my buddy, my crew, that we could do that, you know. And they were all hit me on the back and thank me. I said, hell, fella, we ain't got the goods yet, let's wait. So about the 5th day, a Jeep drives up to our tent, we all run out, and there's Thirsty with all the goods. Man, he set up that door like a pro, you know, he knew just exactly what to do. Set up the stove. The stove was made out of a 55-gallon drum. And on the bottom of it was about a 75-millimeter shell, and all holes burnt on it, every about a ½ inch or so. And in the bottom of that shell, he had a handful of pebbles. And he had that thing welded to the bottom of the tank. And on top of the tank, he had a 4-inch hole where the vent would be to go out to the roof. And the lines for the petrol were oxygen lines. And we had a petrol tank outside on an airframe, and it was higher than everything else inside the tent, so that everything was fed gravity. And we had a pinch valve right by the drum where we could control the flow of the 100-octane fuel. And the funny thing about, you light that up and you got pow, you know, like an explosion. And then we set the valve so it just dropped every 2 or 3 seconds, go pow, pow. And then those pebbles get hot. And when that gas hit those pebbles, it explode. And it heat up that drum. That drum could get red hot, you know, if you didn't control the heat in there, the flow of petrol. Well, anyway, so he built me a bunk. And I said, hey, Thirsty, where's my springs? Greek, no springs. So he had slats of frag bomb boxes. And that was the bottom of my bunk. I said, okay. So what I did, I took a piece of canvas from the cot, laid it on top of that. Then I took one of my blankets, folded it double, laid it on top of that. And then I took my sleeping bag that we had, it was all feathers, you know, and I laid that on top. And then I put the mattress cover on top of that. And what I would do, I'd slide into the mattress cover, and the blanket on top, that was it. For a pillow, I'd take my B-10 jacket, and I found a piece of a branch of a tree. I rolled that up in there, and that was my pillow. And that was for the duration. Well, we took care of all that. And then living in a tent wasn't bad. Of course, we didn't have any wooden floors or anything, but that ground gets hard like a rock when you keep walking on it. And we'd sweep out any dirt we brought in, mud on our feet or something like that, we'd sweep that out. But it was good. You know, we were like camping for 9 months. You know, you guys went camping at one time, you sleep in your sleeping bag and nice and comfortable. Sometimes your feet get cold, you wish you were back in bed sleeping in your sack. Well, we were camping, I was camping anyway for 9 months. That's the 9 months I spent at the 726. And possibly some of you boys probably went to a sculpture with ice, where you put statues and so forth. And the rooms where these statues were, so they wouldn't melt, was about 9 degrees above zero. Well, when we were flying at 25,000 feet, the temperature was about a minus 39, that was a pretty warm day, all the way up to a minus 60. And a minus 39, your wind chill factor is 101 degrees. At minus 60, it was a minus 148 degrees. So it was so cold we had to dress to combat those freezing temperatures. Now I'm going to tell you how I used to dress to combat those temperatures. First thing I'd do is put on my t-shirt, my long underwear, and my woolen socks. And on top of that, we were issued a heating suit. Now, we didn't have those Bugs Bunny heating suits, the early ones. We had these brand new issue. It was made out of nylon, and in the nylon, they had wires threaded within the material. And the heater suit was made of 3 items: the boots, little booties that cover your feet up to your ankles, and your pants, and the jacket. And they'd all plug in with snap-in plugs, and then had a cord, about a 3-foot cord on it, and you could plug it into your thermostat. Well, the material was nylon, real silky like, and when you put it on, it wasn't tight fit. It was just a snug fit, nice and snug. You know, not like today, some of the girls wear their blue jeans. Now that's tight. Well, anyway, you put that on. After that, I'd put on my OD pants, okay? And then I put on my khaki shirt like this, and it just had my stripes on it and the Air Force signature. And the reason I did that for 2 reasons. If I get shot down, the Germans couldn't accuse me as being a spy. Here I had my uniform, my jacket. And the second reason was we were all sergeants. All the gunners were sergeants. Thank God for Hap Arnold, General Hap Arnold. The reason was in the Geneva Convention, sergeants and above rank don't have to pull duty, any kind of work. And that's why General Hap Arnold made all his gunners sergeants. Let's see here now. Okay, the air crews. Let me tell you a little bit about the air crews. When I was there, the average age of the air crews were from 19 to 22 years. Most of us were out of high school, or the boys off the farm. And a lot of, a lot of boys paid their fees. They never did come home. I was very fortunate. My crew and I, we came home. And flying, you build a bond with your fellow aircrew. And this bond gets better and stronger with every mission. And by the time you've flown several missions, that bond will stay with you for a lifetime. I'm the only survivor of my crew, and sometimes it gets a little lonely. Now, the tour of duty, when I was there, was 35 missions or 50 sorties. In some bomb groups, they call the sortie a mission. But in the 451st, it was 35 missions or 50 sorties. And we had a radius of action on a map. And if you flew beyond that radius of action, you were earned 2 sorties, 1 mission. If you flew below it, you flew 1 sortie, 1 mission. And I ended up with 35 missions and 54 sorties. Now, being young guys and in a crew, I can say we were a bunch of flamboyant young guys. When you go to town, you see the paratroopers, they wear their combat, parachute boots and their Eisenhower jackets, and they stood out among all the other GIs. Well, the air crews were a bunch of flamboyant guys, and they would go to town. I'd go to town, I'd wear my sunglasses, that's different from the other guys. And I'd also wear my A2 jacket. Now, the A2 jacket became a collector's item, really, because looking at an A2 jacket those days, you'd see a squadron patch or a group patch, and then you'd have a 15th Air Force patch, Roman numeral 15, and on top would be the state you originated from, and below would be the squadron and the group you're from. You could tell a lot of things about the guy wearing that jacket. And on the back, there would be War Arch. Usually it would be a picture of a girl, and the name of his ship. And a lot of times there would be a number of bombs on there, indicating how many missions the man flew. And of course I had mine, I had my 35 bombs on there, And that's the way, when we go to town, that's the way we went. And a lot of attention, We were big boys, And during those days, the people treated the servicemen and women like it was one family. I mean, they treated you great. They would invite you to dinner. If you're hitchhiking a ride, they would pick you up, take you. And it was a historical period of that time. The country was united. And I think we won't see that again. I don't think that'll happen again. Now, I think I have a little time here. I'm going to talk to you, read to you a quotation that I received here. It was from the Prime Minister of England. At that time, it was Tony Blair. And in case we find ourselves starting to believe the anti-American sentiment and negativity, we should remember England's Prime Minister, Tony Blair. during Parliament, one of his parliamentarians asked Tony, the Prime Minister, why do you favor America so much? And quote, this was what he told the parliamentarian. A simple way to take measure of a country is to know how many want in and how many want out. Only two defining forces ever offered to die for you. One, Jesus Christ. Two, the American GI. One died for our souls, and the other died for your freedom. Unquote. You know, you may want to pass this on, for many people seem to forget both. I thank you, and I salute you. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Aki, for a very good presentation. You know, I think the title of your book is The Best Seat in the House.
Yeah.
Well, that isn't really true. The best seat in the house was the top turret.
I'll argue with that.
You see, at the top turret, we could rotate 360 degrees,
Right.
and we were right above the bomb bay. In an emergency, we could be out of the turret. If we could locate our parachute, we could have that attached and be out of the plane in seconds.
Yeah.
Now the nose turret, that wasn't true. To a certain extent, you were dependent upon maybe a little help from the navigator or the bombardier, and of course that presumes they were going to wait on you to get out of the plane themselves.
That's true.
So anyway, Aki has a very good book that would warrant anyone to explore and tell him about his wartime experiences. Our next speaker is going to be Richard Miner, Gene, and emergency landing at Vis. Now, for those of you that may not know, Vis was a very small island off of the coast of Yugoslavia, and it was inhabited by Tito partisans, but the airfield was controlled, or at least operated, by the British. And so it's going to be interesting to know just what happened to Gene's plane that made it necessary for them to go down on this, and what happened. So Gene, if you...
I want to bring to life, I'll make just a couple of presentations to the Flying Physician Association in Texas once, and they've been talking, I was supposed to talk again the next morning. Well, some doctor called me that night and said, Mr. Miner, did you know any good jokes? I said, yeah, I do a few. He said, well, why the hell didn't you tell them? Because you added something to your story. So the next day I did, but I won't repeat those, but I have a couple that I'd like to get everybody acquainted with. This was told by a Catholic priest starting his homily. He said old George was a real elderly man, very poor health, and he lived with his wife and a little teenage daughter. And they were very concerned about his age and his health. So one day they bought him a lottery ticket. And it wound up that damn lottery ticket paid him $10 million. So they didn't want to tell him, afraid it affected his health, or probably kick the bucket. So they invited the preacher to come to tell him, right to dinner. So he came to dinner, and after dinner they was out on the porch smoking their pipes, and the preacher asked George, said, George, what would you do if you won $10 million on the lottery? Said George sat there a minute, studied. He said, well, preacher, I would keep $5 million and give $5 million to the church. The preacher died. Another one is a doctor friend of mine, I worked for him for a long time, wrote me this story about a very prominent lawyer from Dallas decided to go duck hunting. Well, he knew their territory pretty well, so one Saturday morning he was out early, and a duck flew by and he killed it, and it fell in this pasture. It was fenced in pasture. And he kind of hesitated whether he ought to go get that duck or not. He finally made up his mind, well, I killed the duck, it's my duck, so I'll just go get it. So he went over there, and just about the time he started to pick up, old farmer rode up on his tractor and said, what are you doing? He said, I'm getting my duck. The farmer said, well, that ain't your duck, it's in my pasture. Well, the attorney told this farmer, said, well, I'm an attorney from Dallas, and I'll sue you for everything on that duck. So the farmer said, well, we got a better system out here. Said, we call it the three-kick settlement. And he asked him how he settled it. He said, well, each man gets to kick the other one 3 times, and they repeat the process until somebody gives up. And the old timer said, well, I'm a hell of a lot bigger than he is, and I think I can handle that. So he let the farmer do the kicking first. So the old farmer had his big boots on, and he kicked that attorney right in the groin. He bent over in agony. Well, he kicked him by the chin. It just settled him on the ground. I mean, he was miserable. And his third kick, he hit him right in his stomach. And so the attorney vomited, and it just was in hell of shape. So he got up, and the farmer was getting on his tractor. And the attorney said, hey, wait a minute. He said, I get 3 kicks. He said, no. Said, I don't like duck very much anyway, you can have it. But anyway, this trip that I'm talking about happened on February 1st, 1945. We were over Vienna. I don't remember if it was Moose Beer Bomb or in town or where, but I remember the incident. And we had the feather #1 engine right off the reel, and the #2 engine was damaged and wasn't pulling very much. And so the engineer and the pilot spent a good time trying to keep that engine going, and we had a co-pilot we didn't think very much of, and he couldn't keep the plane at altitude. So we had to abandon the formation, and the pilot told the co-pilot to contact fighters, and that day the code word for fighters was baseball, and it was the Red Tails who were escorting us at that time. So the co-pilot, he was he didn't have a 5 mission. He didn't none of us care for him too much, but he didn't switch his intercom to radio, and I'll never forget it. Everybody on the plane heard him. He said, "Hello, baseball. Hello, baseball." Blue Heart, stand your own intercom. So anyway, he got back off, and he said, after the thing was over with, that it was the Tuskegee boys, and we had wanted some help. We was by ourselves, and he said, the guy who answered him said, "Yassa boss, we out here, we see you." But anyway, they did. They escorted us all the way to almost to Vietz before they disappeared. And I was, of course, in the ball turret, and that's not a very comfortable position when something like this happened. So, and we didn't have any. We was out of the flight area, and so I got out of the turret, and I pumped it up into the fuselage. And but I didn't lock the gun because I thought I might have to get back in that thing. And I started throwing stuff out. I mean, anything weighed an ounce was out the escape hatch. I remember very vividly throwing a belt of 50 caliber machine guns out of the shell belts of 50 caliber shells out of that thing. I had them in an arm as it come out of the box. Throw them out, and then the slipstream would hit that belt, and you'll never it looked like a giant reptile of some sort wriggling toward the land. I'll never forget that sight. The rest of the effort was made was between the pilot and the engineer trying to keep that number 2 engine going till we could get to Vietz. So they finally decided we was close enough that the altitude we had, we was going to had to feather the number 2 engine. Now that's 2 engines on the same side, which is not good. And me and my pilot lived in Edmonds, Washington, and after I found the group and got into this organization, we used to visit him a lot. Pete and I went to his funeral about 4 or 5 years ago. But he would talk about the no-no on those 2 engines on a dead engines on the same side. You didn't bank into those engines. But we had to bank into them to get even with the approach to Vietz. And he did that, and he saved our lives a couple of times. He was a very, very good pilot. And they got the gear down manually. We didn't have any hydraulics. We did our flaps and brakes. We didn't have any. And so he hit the ground real hard. It was really a bang when we hit the ground. It must have stripped the gun turret's gears, because as we landed on it hit hard that gear strip, and then the gun started dragging. Then it was a wire revetment, same as we had at the 451st, but it was a lot shorter than what we had. And so he had to keep his airspeed up because of the dead engine. And anyway, we hit the ground real hard, and I guess maybe that those guns dragging that revetment slowed it some, and of course he cut the other 2 engines off. But at the end, we couldn't turn on the taxi strip, And we ran right out into just kept on going and ran right out into a muddy field, and the old 24 just sunk and stopped us, man. We was out that thing, we could say jackrabbit. And the trucks picked us up when we waded out of that mud. And they took us up to where the operations were, and Wynn said that the British operated the base, and they had hurricanes there that they would just fly in there and taxi up, cut it off, refuel, and put rockets under it, and then start the engines, go back. They were bombing bridges and so forth in Yugoslavia. That was quite an operation. I mean, you could tell there was a war going on at that place. And then they took us over to the little village, a little city of Vis, and it was very neat, attractive. We got there just at dusk dark. It was in a bay, and they had fixed us, and we weren't the only plane there that day. There were several. It was in an old hotel, like deal, and they were cooking heating these sea rations in huge pots. And that was one of the best meals I ate while I was in the Army. I was really hungry. That was worth the trip. Anyway, after we had our meal, they give each one of us a blanket and took us upstairs. It was about a 2 or 3 story hotel, but with flashlights. It didn't have any. It was beat up, so it wasn't any electricity upstairs. So me and I believe the pilot and the navigator, there's 3 of us I know, we put down one blanket and then covered ourselves with the other 2. Well, as we went to bed, we could feel a breeze. And outside, I was in the middle because I was the smallest one. Oh, we had all our flying gear on there. And he said there was a hole right close to where we was, so I gave him my flight jacket because I was in the middle where it's warm. And we made it pretty good after that. But the next morning we got up, the whole damn inn out of that hotel was shot. I mean, they used to lob those 105s in there from the mainland, and it was beat up bad. But we stopped out a little bitty hole, and the whole end of it was out. Then we went downstairs for breakfast, and I don't remember too much about the breakfast. It wasn't as good as the dinner we had. As soon as we were waiting for the Texas airport, a squadron of uniformed troops came by, marching in unison. And in that formation, there were women, 4, 5, 6 women, about a 20. I thought that was, of course, very unusual in those days. And on the way to the airport, we saw them out there in a field with combat training. There was a war going on there. And the C-47 came just a little bit after we got to the airport and took us back to Fauquier. There was several crews in there, not only ours, 2 or 3 more on that C-47. And then the truck picked us up and carried us back to the base. That was quite an operation. It was kind of strange to see that English airfield. I mean, that thing had saved a lot of lives and had done a lot of damage to the area, the Yugoslav area. I had another mission right after we got to the 451st. We had to fly, we supposedly had to fly with 5 missions separate with experienced crews before we could fly together. Well, the first mission that was scheduled for us was me and the nose gunner and the radio operator was scheduled for with this crew. And that night, old boy that was a ball turret gunner, he protested. He wanted to try to get his 35 missions in. He protested, and they scratched me, but the radio operator and the nose gunner went. And over the target, they were hit with in the gas tank, ruptured their gas tank. And so they saw there wasn't no way they could make it back to base. So they started flying east toward the Russian lines, and a couple of ME-109s jumped them, and they let their gear down and signed a surrender, and they escorted them to a German base that was, I don't know what base it was, pretty close to Vienna. And on the approach, they got in a cloud formation and lost their escorts. Well, then they headed straight east again, and they ran out of gas, had to bail out over Hungary. And the Russians picked them up in an old Ford tri-motored airplane, took them to Bucharest, Romania, and they stayed there 13 days, and we could get no information out of the intelligence. They wouldn't tell us nothing of what happened to them. Of course, I flew 2 or 3 missions, but they was gone 13 days, and when they returned, boy, we were really glad. We didn't know they was coming until they got there. That was what was, you talk about intelligence then as compared to now, it's ridiculous. That's the one thing that's really killing us. If you want to find out where the Army's going to bomb next day, just turn the television on. They stayed there in Bucharest. The Russians got a whole hotel and put those, I think it was 12 of them in that group at that time. They had an instructor gunner, I think, aboard. But anyway, they was wined and dined after they found out that, they were Americans finally, with their escape kits, had 50 silver dollar certificates there. That boy, they was rich when they. And then the old big generals, they'd come in with 2 bottles of vodka on each arm, and they really had a party. The only thing they could say, they could understand each other, was Russia, Stalin, and Churchill, and Roosevelt. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, and that was the East Coast. But they had a time. Oh, the nose gunner, he sprained his ankle when he landed he landed in a farmer's yard, and they had killed a goose. Boy, no, Pat, he loved to eat. I mean, he got right up his alley. Just he sat down to eat with the Russians come got him. He could eat. And that was something bad for Pat. He was looking forward to that. And when we were in OTU in Pueblo, Colorado, this is one of the reasons we didn't care for our co-pilot very much. We were on a training mission one day and had a brand new plane out of Willow Run. And we got 500 feet in the air, and the co-pilot reduced the mixture, gas mixture, only he reduced it to 0. And we went down in the city dump of Pueblo, Colorado. When we was going down, we headed right for a house and Lou dumped the flaps and just barely made it over that house, and we landed in that the city dump. And boy, we was clear of that airplane before it got stopped hardly. You could hear oxygen tubes, you know, that had broken, and oxygen and oil didn't get along too well together. So what really happened out of that, the tail gunner, he and the nose gunner were on the bulkhead of the Bombay. And the airplane, of course, I've got a picture of it, it landed in this position, the tail was way up in the air. And I had my hand on that escape hatch latch. And I mean, I sailed out of there like a quail. And we had an instructor gunner, he come right out behind me. And someone hollered, "Help!" in that damn airplane. So I got on that instructor gunner's shoulders and climbed back in that thing. And it was so much dust, you could not see hanging. And I started toward that bulkhead, and what had happened, the ball turret had come up and fouled the tail gunner's leg, foot, and the nose gunner picked that 1,100-pound turret up over where that boy got loose. Just about the time I got to where they were, well, he hollered, "I'm loose, get out." So I sailed out that window again, and this tail gunner that was hurt, he could come out of that and he ran a 100-yard dash like you wouldn't believe. He was way by himself out there. We got the pilot, the bombardier got out in there. We got him out. Well, we was out of that airplane in about 20, 30 seconds. I mean, but the irony of the whole thing was, I was talking about the intelligence oil. You know, you didn't get your name in the paper when something like that happened for security reasons. And it had a picture on the front page of the Pueblo Journal, and it had a picture of the plane, and the headline was "Bomber Crashes, Minor Injuries." I was the only one who got my name in the paper. I tell you again, one other little story. I had a very good friend who retired as a priest, and his name was Aberry. You know where he's from. Anyway, we went to dinner. Took him to dinner one night, and that was during when they bombed Libya, you know, and France wouldn't let them fly over the area to get there, but take everybody off. And so one teacher asked me, he said, "Gene," said, "what do you think about France not letting us fly over that area?" I said, "Well, Monty, the only thing that French could do was surrender and make wine." So that was the whole thing that bothers me is the security now. I mean, we didn't have a chance to say, you ought to see the email when it got home. There wasn't nothing in there but a salutation, just about. One other little incident happened to me during this time. When the war was over, we came home, we flew home down to Marrakech in the car, across to Natal, Brazil. The thing that was bad about the whole trip was we were, when 02U, we had, there's a crew 164 and 165. I don't remember which one, but we were real close. I think they were in the 727 squadron, but they, from Foggia, they give you a different airplane you had when you landed Foggia, and to take home, and the crew we landed the first night in Marrakesh, Africa, and they reported a gas leak. And they supposed to fix it, so then we flew the next day from Marrakesh to Dakar, and they really smelled it then. They made a pretty good sized issue out of it. And the next morning, we took off to go across the Atlantic. Well, the crew took off. They said it was all right. They took off, and the gas was real bad, and they turned around and went back. Well, they supposedly fixed it again, and about an hour out of the car, that thing blew in a million pieces. It was that crew was next to us, and it was kind of a bad trip because of that situation. We flew to Natal, and while we was there, we bought they told us if we'd stay 7 days, we could go in town, Natal, down in Natal. Well, the PX, boy, you could buy, silk hose back then was a priority, and cigarettes, and there was something else watches. We bought watches like, really cheap. And so we wanted to stay 7 days to go to town. So we had a bad airplane problem. I forget what it was. There wasn't nothing wrong with it. We just wanted to stay 7 days. But while we were there was a Navy man came through with a monkey in transit, and they wouldn't let him take that monkey past Natal, so we bought the monkey. $25, name was George, good, really pretty monkey. And so that monkey, we'd take it to BX every night, and then we got beer. I mean, it was real good beer. We had, and that monkey, we'd pour him a saucer, he'd drink that beer. And one day we was in the barracks with that monkey, and back, I don't know if it's still have it now, but they had a dentine package, and then you open the little thread-like thing, and then got your dentine piece out. Well, they handed that to that monkey, and he got that tray. He had that gum in his mouth before he could turn around. Well, I snatched that gum out of his hand, and he nailed my hand. He was still mad. And I got up and I started running toward the back door, and there was double ducks in there, and that monkey was on there. I escaped, but anyway, we got to. We had on the 6th day they told us we couldn't wasn't gonna let us stay, so we come home. And so we had a old portable radio that we took all the guts out of it, threw it away, and put the monkey in there. And he's all right for a while, but when we first put him in there, boy, he raised hell. And so we was thinking about trying to get him through customs. And so we landed at Savannah, Georgia, Puerto Rico, and then Savannah, and they had a huge, big hangar full of people that they were inspecting. Customs was inspecting, and we had that monkey, and he was raising sand. He was mad about that, getting that thing, and we was making racket. Everybody thought we were drunk, but we got the monkey through. And anyway, and then they sent us to Charleston, West Virginia, to that was transportation headquarters, I think, of South Carolina, to go home for furlough. And we put that monkey back in. We went to town that night and put the monkey in in the radio again, put him up on windowsill. And we come back, it was, I guess, about 12:30, 1 o'clock. Somebody stole a monkey. I was glad of it because I sure as hell didn't eat that monkey. We came home and they sent us from Camp Chaffee, there's about 5 or 6 of us, to Camp Chaffee. By mistake, we were supposed to went to Tampa, but the ground crew met in Bangor, Maine, and that's where they sent us. So we was all combat crew. And we stayed up on the holiday. We didn't have to do nothing. Just put, whatever your duty was, that's what you had to do while you were there. Cook or maintenance or whatever it was. But we put combat crew only. And we didn't hit a lick of the snake about one night there. And then they just finally found us, and we decided that, you know, they'd get us to Tampa to go to Japan. And on the way to Tampa, in Boston, of course, they radios were blaring, and the war was over when we was on the way to Tampa. But we was going through New York City, and we told the guy in charge of the ship he could go to Tampa if he wanted to, but we was staying in New York City, BJ night. I've got evidence of that with me and four of us went in Jack Ditch's bar, and I mean, it was people, solid people everywhere. And I remember we used to hit it'd be admirals, they had all the gold on their hat and all that. We'd have our back there, hi, sailor. Well, them admirals didn't like that very much. I also saw a GI and a sailor. They had big bleachers they built, that they got up on there and changed clothes and walked off in different directions. Some odd things that really happened. But this was saying to be in Times Square, VJ night, don't happen to you every day. I appreciate the opportunity, and I don't know where my friend Pete is, but he was the 96-year-old guy. He was our tail gunner. We got him, that nose gunner that ran and hurt his foot. Well, he decided that he went in the hospital. We got ready to go. We didn't have no tail gunner. On the way, Pete's group was a B-17 out going to the same place we were. Well, they had a layover a while in some little town in Kansas, and the co-pilot, Pete's co-pilot, wound up in a cistern, drowned. I don't know, somebody threw him in there or what happened. But anyway, we inherited Pete out of that crew. That's how we got Pete. Pete's a good guy. I mean, you make bonds with people. I had no brothers, and to me, that was part of my life. Those 9 guys, and we lost our bombardier at the time they had so many bombardiers over there they couldn't count them all. So we had to take a bombardier. That's when they pattern bombed, you know, the head bombardier. That's the only one we had. Everybody else toggled. Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Gene. I'd like to just mention, however, that the ball turret gunner probably had to be the bravest person on our crew. First of all,
that one more story about that. There was a rumor, and while we were at the 451st, that ball turret gunner went to town, and he and another GI got together in a bar, and they decided they'd swap positions. But everything agreed to do it, and the GIS of ball turret gunner, hey, by the way, what position you fly? He said, ball turret gunner. He said, the deal's over.
Well, anyway, you had to tolerate having your knees kind of above your head for 4, 5, 6 hours. And in an emergency, it was very, very difficult for you to move. And you need a little help to get out of the turret. It took a little time. And you can imagine, with the plane spiraling down, just what a fix the ball turret gunner would have. But I did want to comment also about this. During the war, we had over 200 bombers that had to take emergency landings at this. Our crew was one of them. And I never understood why the Germans tolerated us having an airfield just off Yugoslavia that permitted that to happen. They had to know what was going on. And
They didn't have any gas to get there.
right. And it was difficult to land there. I know that our pilot repeated what the English control tower said to him when he was trying to land. He said, "Get her down, Yank, get her down." And that was the point. It was mountainous, the runway was short, and there was evidence all around the runway that a lot of planes did not get it down properly. But anyway, just a couple of things. The hospitality room here supposedly is going to be left open for us. And they say they have quite a bit of food left over. And they want us to partake of that if anyone is interested. That would be right after this meeting. So hopefully no one's closed the door there, and feel free to go in the hospitality room, and I guess the food is plentiful, and beverages and so forth. So we'll get back together again at 2 o'clock, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.